We're reading in Book 2, the book of the Traveller of the Worlds, and Canto 5, the Godheads of the Little Life. That's where we start, He's been talking about man. Our human understanding of the creation of the universe. That's what we read about last time, no? Sri Aurobindo seems to endorse it, but then he says, or so it seems to man's audacious mind. And then he says, human beings have to work things out like that with their mind, no? This is the way in which we slowly gain knowledge and understanding. So I'm going to read on from there, line 179. This vast perpetual motion, caught and held in the mysterious and unchanging change of the persistent movement we call time, and ever renewing its recurrent beat. These mobile rounds that stereotype a flux, these static objects in the cosmic dance that are but energy's self-repeating whorls, prolonged by the spirit of the brooding void, awaited life and sense and waking mind. A little the dreamer changed his pose of stone. But when the inconscient, scrupulous work was done, and chance coerced by fixed, immutable laws, a scene was set for nature's conscious play. Then stirred the spirit's mute, immutable, immobile sleep. The force concealed broke dumbly, slowly out. A dream of living woke in matter's heart. A will to live moved the inconscient's dust. A freak of living startled vacant time, ephemeral in a blank eternity, infinitesimal in a dead infinite. A subtler breath quickened dead matter's forms. The world's set rhythm changed to a conscious cry. A serpent power twinned the insensible force. Islands of living dotted lifeless space, and germs of living formed in formless air. A life was born that followed matter's law, ignorant of the motives of its steps, ever inconstant, yet forever the same. It repeated the paradox that gave it birth. Its restless, and unstable stabilities recurred incessantly in the flow of time, and purposeful movements in unthinking forms betrayed the heavings of an imprisoned will. Waking and sleep lay locked in mutual arms. Helpless and indistinct came pleasure and pain, trembling with the first faint thrills of a world soul. A strength of life that could not cry or move, yet broke into beauty, signing some deep delight. An inarticulate sensibility, throbs of the heart of an unknowing world, ran through its somnolent torpor, and there stirred a vague, uncertain thrill, a wandering beat, a dim unclosing as of secret eyes. Infant self-feeling grew, and birth was born. A Godhead woke, but lay with dreaming limbs. Her house refused to open its sealed doors. Insentient to our eyes that only see the form, the act, and not the imprisoned God. Life hid in her pulse occult of growth and power, a consciousness with mute, stifled beats of sense, a mind suppressed that knew not yet of thought, an inert spirit that could only be. At first she raised no voice, no motion dared. Charged with world power, instinct with living force, only she clung with her roots to the safe earth, thrilled dumbly to the shocks of ray and breeze, and put out tendril fingers of desire. The strength in her yearning for sun and light felt not the embrace that made her breathe and live. Absorbed, she dreamed, content with beauty and hue. It's not so easy to follow and understand. No? Last week we read Aurobindo's description of how the material universe, the world of matter, might have come into existence. And now in what I read just now, he's speaking about the emergence of the first life forms. You will start, Sudarshan?
vast perpetual motion, caught and held in the mysterious and unchanging chain of the persistent movement we call time, and ever renewing its recurrent beat. These mobile rounds, the stereotype, the flux, the static object, the cosmic dance, that are but energy, self-repeating whorls, prolonged by the spirit of the brooding void, awaited life of sense and waking mind. A little the dreamer changed its pose of stone.
Thank you. So that is still the material universe. This vast perpetual motion goes on and on and on, and it seems to be caught and held in this mysterious and unchanging change of the persistent movement we call time. Time is something really very, very puzzling to us and to our scientists. We perceive this, somehow this unfolding. It's repetitive. In a way, it doesn't change. And we can't really explain how it could possibly happen. But it's a persistent movement. And there seems to be a kind of rhythm in it. We experience the rhythms of day and night, but there are also the rhythms of the planets orbiting the sun and of the movement of our galaxy. So there's some kind of a pulse, as if time is being measured. We can observe these mobile rounds, these circular movements, and they seem to be, he says, stereotyping, creating a certain fixed order, a flow of time. And then what there is are all these static objects, these things, which take part in this cosmic dance. And what are these things? They seem to be only repetitive movements of energy. Energies repeating whorls. This whorls with an O. It's what we have in our ear, these rounded movements, or in a shell. All these things, this movement, this beat, these objects, they seem to be brought into existence by repetitive movements of energy or force. And this seems to be prolonged, continued by the spirit of the brooding void, the emptiness of space, which nevertheless seems to give birth to things, like a bird sitting on her eggs until they hatch. This brooding emptiness. All this in the material universe is waiting for the manifestation of life and senses, and then even mind waking up. So what has happened seems to be that the one who is dreaming the universe has just moved a little bit, has a little, he has changed his pose, like a statue, as if a statue would move just a little bit. That's how it must have been for eons and eons of cosmic time. But then something happened. Dhanalakshmi.
But when the inconscient's scrupulous work was done, and chance coerced by fixed, immutable laws, a scene was set for nature's conscious play. Then, stirred the spirit's new immobile sleep, the force concealed broke dumbly, slowly out. A dream of living folk in matter's heart, a will to live, moved the inconscious dust. A freak of living, startled, vacant time, ephemeral in a blank eternity, infinitesimal in a dead infinite.
Yes. So that dreaming, material dreaming, went on for so long. All this time, the inconscient was at work, scrupulously, a detailed, careful work was going on. And perhaps to start with, that work was, at least seemed to be done by chance. But a stage came when things were not anymore ruled by chance, but more by certain laws, what we would think of as the laws of nature or the laws of physics, the laws of thermodynamics. So when that had happened, that's as if a scene has been prepared in a theater, and then the curtain can open and we can see a new scene. Nature's conscious play. It's not any longer determined by the unconsciousness of matter and material force. There's an opportunity for some consciousness to work. So then that dreamer, that spirit, stirs a bit more, not just that little tiny movement, but in the sleep, the immobile sleep of matter, the spirit moved. And that hidden force, that energy, began to break out dumbly. It doesn't make any sound, and it happens slowly, but it's the emergence, the beginning of the emergence of life in matter. A dream of living woke in matter's heart. A will to live moved the inconscient's dust, all those tiny particles of matter. A freak of living. A freak is something abnormal. So in that unconscious world, life, the beginning of conscious life, seems really like a freak, something totally abnormal and unpredictable. A freak of living, startled, vacant time. In that empty time when nothing was happening, suddenly something happens. But it's something very, very short-lived, ephemeral, in that blank, empty eternity. Just for a moment, there's a quiver of life. And it is infinitesimal, incredibly, indescribably small in that apparently, that infinite in which there seems to be no life, which seems to be dead. Bhovana.
Actually, I don't understand the last sentence. Infinitesimal in a dead infinite. How the infinite will be dead?
Well, there's no life yet. So there's just the first tiny movement of living, or a will to live is there. If something is for a moment alive, it's just a freak for a moment. He says it's ephemeral. It's only there for a moment. And it's something incredibly tiny in all this vast, non-living material universe. This infinity in which there's no life.
So there is no life in the infinity.
Hmm?
And to take it
To start with, in the material universe. I mean, of course, now we realize that the potentiality for life must have been there. But that's just what he's saying, that it wasn't expressed at all until this moment.
a certain bread thickened with matter's forms. The whole set rhythm chained with conscious fiber. A certain power
Twin.
the insensible force. Islands of living dotted lifeless flame, and germs of living form and formless gas.
Yes, so this is what happens. A subtler breath. Whatever kind of atmosphere had been there before, this is more subtle. This is a subtler prana, a kind of different kind of energy, quickened. If something quickens, it moves more quickly. But we also speak about quick, what is alive, and what is dead. There's a contrast between what is quick and what is dead. We can say quick and slow, that's a different comparison. So when something quickens, it wakes up and lives. So in those forms, material forms in which there's no life, which seem to be dead, something changes. This set, fixed material rhythms changed to a conscious cry. There's a sound. Living things make some kind of a conscious cry. A serpent power twinned the insensible force. The serpent power is the power of life energy. So that is matching, it is twinning with that insensible force, the force of matter. They're joining together. And so as a result, here and there, in that lifeless space, little islands of living appear. Germs of living, that minute, invisible little molecules or atoms of living formed. In that formless air, the first forms began to appear. A life was born, a life that follows the law of matter. This is what we read about in the previous canto, in Canto 4, about how these living forms had to follow the rule of inert, unconscious matter. Philomena.
A life was born that followed matter's law, ignorant of the motives of its steps, ever inconscient and forever the same. It repeated the paradox that gave it birth, its restless and unstable stabilities. record incessantly in the flow of time, and purposeful the moments in unthinking forms, capturing the habits of our
imprisoned will. Yeah, thank you. So this is the life that follows the laws of matter. That life is ignorant. It's not aware of what is moving it, the motives of its steps. It doesn't know anything about that. These things are just happening. It's always moving, it can't be relied on, it's not steady, and yet in a way it's always the same. So that life repeats the paradox, the contradictory miracle or mystery that gave birth to it. How can mobile life, beginning to be conscious, how can it happen in totally inert matter? It's something mysterious, paradoxical, and contradictory. So he says there's some stabilities, some things are stable and remain the same, but there's a kind of restlessness about this life, and the stabilities are also unstable. They don't stay, but they recur, they repeat themselves again and again and again in the flow of time. And so, purposeful movements in these unthinking forms, these first forms of life, they betray, they give signs of a will that's imprisoned within them. If we can just imagine those first primitive living forms that emerged, perhaps in the sea, most probably in the sea. And they just move somehow. They come into existence and they go out of existence, and then other similar ones come into existence. It goes on getting repeated without stopping in the flow of time. And in those primitive life organisms, there's purposeful movements. Even in the single-celled protozoa, they can feel something. They can feel if the water's too salty or too hot, or if there's some food nearby. They can put out a pseudopodium, grab it and take it in. Very, very purposeful movements in unthinking forms. It's not that the little forms are deciding what they have to do. Just instinctively they do it. So he says that those movements that just happen without anybody thinking or willing them are an indication that somehow within those creatures there's a will. It's within them, imprisoned within them, and in these little movements it can express itself. It is recalling a bit the way that 𝐼𝐹𝐵 saw these first living creatures, and they looked so useless and so primitive, and what good can come of this? But Sri Aurobindo says that 𝐼𝐹𝐵 could see how important in the future development of the earth are these tiny little primitive creatures. That we might look at and say, what is that? Is that worth existing? No. But yes, these were essential stages in the development of complex life. And then he describes another stage of this development of life, 𝐶𝐬𝐹.
Waking and sleep lay low in mutual arms, helpless and indistinct kind, pleasure and pain, trembling with the first faint thrills of the world soul, a strength of life that would not cry or move. It broke into a beauty, signing some deep delight and inarticulate sensibility, throes of the heart of unknowing birth, ran through its somnolent torpor and there stirred, a vague, uncertain thrill, a wandering beat, a dim and closing as of secret eyes.
Yes. So that life is in a state which is both waking and sleep. They are interlocked together, like as if the waking and the sleep are embracing. And into that state of half awakeness and half asleepness come indistinct sensations of pleasure and pain. This gives some kind of quiver of life, trembling with the first faint thrills of a world soul. There's a soul, there was a will behind. Now even a soul is manifesting itself. The first faint thrills. So that's a first strength, a first force of life. That life can't make any sound, it can't move, but it broke into beauty. I think this is the emergence of the first flowers. They couldn't make any sound, they couldn't move, but they could express themselves in forms of beauty. And the fact that they can express themselves in forms of beauty means that they are signaling, they're showing a sign of some deep delight that is dwelling within all the forms of the world. These are the first manifestations of that deep delight. A sensibility, something that can sense things, but it can't express itself, it's inarticulate. And yet there's a throb, like the throb of the heart. That's the typical sound of life, the heartbeat. This is the heart of an unknowing, unconscious world is expressing itself in this sensibility. And that throb, or those throbs, are running through this sleepiness, this somnolent torpor. Torpor is when you're in a kind of state where you can't wake up. Sleepy torpor. And something stirs, a vague, uncertain thrill, a wandering beat, something that's moving, and a dim unclosing as of secret eyes. Something wakes up, a beginning of consciousness. Joanne.
infant self-feeling grew, and birth was born. A Godhead woke, but lay with dreaming limbs. Her house refused to open its sealed doors. Insentient to our eyes that only see the form, the act, and not the imprisoned God. Life hid in her pulse occurred of growth and power. A consciousness with mute, stifled beats of sense. A mind suppressed that knew not yet of thought. An inner spirit that could only be.
Thank you. So the next step is this self-feeling, self-awareness. Infant self-feeling grew, and birth was born. The idea of one life form giving birth to another one. A Godhead, a divine being, the life force or the life goddess. She's waking up, but just yet she doesn't move. Like us, perhaps in the morning, we prefer to just lie for a while, half dreaming. Lay with dreaming limbs. She doesn't move. Her house refused to open its sealed doors, so she doesn't want to become aware of the world around her. So this life is insentient to our eyes, to our perceptions. We think it has no sensibilities, no sensitivity. But that's because we only see the form, the outside, and maybe if there's some movement, we don't see that divine being that is within the form, within the movement. Life, this great life principle, keeps hidden in her hidden pulse. We're not even aware of that heartbeat, that pulse of growth and power. But she's hiding within herself a consciousness which produces those beats, those mute, stifled beats of sense. Mute means silent. Stifled means that any noise is smothered. But these are beats of sense, feeling, sensation. And there's a mind that is still suppressed. It doesn't know how to think yet. This life goddess is an inert spirit. It doesn't yet know how to move, how to become active. It can only be. It can only exist. Amrita. Amrita?
At first she aroused no voice, no motion there, charged with both power, instinct with living force. Only she clung with her roots to the safe house, thrilled dumbly to the shocks of rain and bliss, and put out pendulum fingers of desire. The strange in her yawning was sound and bright, felt not the embrace that made her bliss and live. Absorbed, she dreamed, content with beauty and beauty.
Yes. So this is this stage where she's lying with dreaming limbs, no? She's just being, just existing. So She doesn't make any sound, she doesn't say anything, she doesn't move. This life principle is charged, full of world power. She's instinct with living force, an immense power is there. But she's only using it to cling with her roots to the safe earth. It's this line that makes me think that he's speaking about the first plants and flowers. And she is receiving sensations. She's thrilling dumbly to the shocks of rain and breeze, rays of sunlight, the wind comes, the plant is responding, feels those things. No? And she put out tendril fingers of desire. It's a very nice thing that one can watch. If you've got a creeping plant near your window, the way that the plant puts out these, they're not even stalks, but puts out tendrils. Yes, and then they feel around, and if they can touch something that they can hold on to, then they very quickly they wrap themselves around it, and then they pull themselves up and do it again. That's an expression of desire. It's the desire for the sun and the light. That's all it can do. The strength in her yearning for sun and light doesn't really feel, there's no real sensation of the embrace, the divine embrace of consciousness and power that makes her breathe and live. But she's still in this absorbed, dreamy state, and it's enough for her to express her beauty and her lovely colors. We'll stop there for today. Because now another step is coming, the next step. This vast perpetual motion, caught and held in the mysterious and unchanging change of the persistent movement we call time, and ever renewing its recurrent beat. These mobile rounds that stereotype a flux, these static objects in the cosmic dance that are but energies self-repeating whorls, prolonged by the spirit of the brooding void, awaited life and sense and waking mind. A little the dreamer changed his pose of stone. But when the inconscient's scrupulous work was done, and chance coerced by fixed immutable laws, a scene was set for nature's conscious play. Then stirred the spirit's mute, immobile sleep. The force concealed broke dumbly, slowly out. A dream of living woke in matter's heart, A will to live moved the inconscient's dust. A freak of living startled vacant time, ephemeral in a blank eternity, infinitesimal in a dead infinite. A subtler breath quickened dead matter's forms. The world's set rhythm changed to a conscious cry. A serpent power twinned the insensible force. Islands of living dotted lifeless space, and germs of living formed in formless air. A life was born that followed matter's law, ignorant of the motives of its steps. Ever inconstant, yet forever the same, it repeated the paradox that gave it birth. Its restless and unstable stabilities recurred incessantly in the flow of time, and purposeful movements in unthinking forms betrayed the heavings of an imprisoned will. Waking and sleep lay locked in mutual arms. Helpless and indistinct came pleasure and pain, trembling with the first faint thrills of a world soul. A strength of life that could not cry or move, yet broke into beauty, signing some deep delight. An inarticulate sensibility, throbs of the heart of an unknowing world, ran through its somnolent torpor, and there stirred a vague, uncertain thrill, a wandering beat, a dim unclosing as of secret eyes. Infant self-feeling grew, and birth was born. A Godhead woke, but lay with dreaming limbs. Her house refused to open its sealed doors. Insentient to our eyes that only see the form, the act, and not the imprisoned God. Life hid in her pulse occult of growth and power, a consciousness with mute, stifled beats of sense, a mind suppressed that knew not yet of thought, an inert spirit that could only be. At first she raised no voice, no motion dared. charged with world power, instinct with living force. Only she clung with her roots to the safe earth, thrilled dumbly to the shocks of ray and breeze, and put out tendril fingers of desire. The strength in her yearning for sun and light felt not the embrace that made her breathe and live. Absorbed, she dreamed, content with beauty and hue.